This is about the life and death of nations and peoples. There's no interest in some sort of short fused deal that is going to elevate him or his administration to greatness. There will be no win for Donald Trump personally in any of this. That was never going to be the case. The only win that he could achieve was to extricate us from this and put the regime in Kiev in a position where it had to reach an agreement with Russia. And that is ultimately what has to happen for any kind of stability and peace to emerge. Now, let's be frank, there's no such thing as a permanent peace in Europe or anywhere else. You can achieve some sort of stability, conditions for stability and prosperity, at least for a limited period of time. And that's what the great statesmen of the past, whether they were Asian and China or Japanese or Russian or British or French, everyone sought to create conditions of stability, knowing full well that there was no permanent solution, but that you could achieve some stable outcome that would last for perhaps decades. And in the meantime, having achieved that, you might be able to work on the remaining issues that could come up in the future and find a way forward past those obstacles. In other words, perfection is the enemy of good enough, but good enough is not a deal. Good enough means everyone has looked at their interests and everyone understands everyone else's interests, and we put together the best possible solution that takes, hopefully, everyone's interests into account, fully recognizing that no one involved is ever going to get everything they want. And I think Mr. Putin knows that, but he's dealing with Zelensky, who has no incentive to do that. He has every incentive to stall, every incentive to spoil opportunities for any resolution, because resolution will lead to his immediate demise. He will be through. He has no future once he enters into a peace agreement. Everybody talks about Netanyahu being totally self-serving and wanting war because peace is the enemy of his future. Well, that may be true, but in this man's case, Zelensky, that's also true. He is not interested in any sort of arrangement whatsoever, because once he reaches it, he's through, because he's never going to get everything that the people that back him want him to get. It's impossible.
Now, I suspect that President Trump is now aware of that. I think that they see that Zelensky the fact that after some of these declarations that the U.S. desire to move down a certain path, to have a ceasefire, to have an energy ceasefire, not a Red Sea, but a Black Sea deal, to whatever, none of which ever transpired, because then instead of doing those, you had the Zelensky side literally throwing the president, the vice president, and Witkoff multiple times under the rhetorical bus, clearly indicating he's not willing to move on his position. So I think that with Trump saying within 3 days he's going to have some kind of, announce his deal, I think probably means that he's getting to we're going to cut you off point. So the question I got to you, first of all, as Zelensky mentioned a minute ago, he's going to have, or else his representatives are going to have meetings in London, I think starting tomorrow. And then according to what Gary showed up there from Russian media is reporting that Witkoff is going to be in Moscow sometime after that. So it appears that the sequencing is, and from what I can understand in reading the tea leaves, we're going to issue something close to an ultimatum to the European and Ukraine side in London, and then whatever comes of that, Witkoff is going to go to Putin and say whatever they're going to say. What do you expect to happen in each of those three cases?
Nothing good. Frankly, the Europeans can do nothing without us militarily. That's simply a fact. So the first thing that has to happen for any sort of arrangement with Moscow is that we need to end any further military aid or support to this criminal regime in Kiev. We need to understand what kind of society and state we're dealing with in Ukraine. Remember, this is arguably one of the most corrupt, maybe the most corrupt countries in the world. Now, that's not something that the Ukrainian people necessarily embraced. It's something that happened to them in the aftermath of the destruction of the Soviet Union, and they've never really recovered from it. This is not going to work. In other words, you go and meet with the Europeans and say, we're going to say X. What do you think? They're going to oppose you. Well, that's fine. You've got to understand where you stand vis-a-vis the Europeans. I would argue that President Trump's position vis-a-vis Europe today is similar to President Eisenhower's position vis-a-vis the British, the French, and the Israelis in 1956 during the Suez Crisis. He needs to turn around and say, that's it. We're out. We will not support any more action against Russia under any circumstances. We are going to normalize our relations. We strongly urge you to do the same. And if you don't want to do that, that's your affair. But bear in mind, this is where we're going. Now, that makes sense. If that's part of his deal, then that's fine. But if he goes to Moscow and says, well, we want to do a deal with you, which is nonsensical language, frankly, but we can't because we can't just walk away. And I'm afraid that that's the kind of thing that will trap the president. He should never have allowed himself to be trapped into this to begin with. He is right. This is not his doing. This is not something he wanted. So there was no reason to jump on this bear trap, which is what he's done. He's got to get out of it. Now, we're not going to get out of it and look as good or strong or capable as we would have had he done this back in January. But the position is still there. He can still get out, which is what he needs to do.
Doug, one of the things that may help him get there is, ironically, what may happen in Europe during these talks here, potentially tomorrow. You mentioned a minute ago that what's in the strategic interest of the United States is to get back to a normalized situation with Russia for all the reasons you've mentioned. We could go into more if you want. But who's not on board with that? Ironically, it's not Zelensky, it's NATO.
Well, there will be no normalization of relations with Russia when the war is over. That will not happen. That will take decades because there is a total lack of confidence. The threat is still there. As I said in my speech, even if the war comes to a conclusion, the Russian threat is still there. They are building a war economy. They are spending so much money on defense. They are producing in 3 months an ammunition what the whole of the alliance is producing in a year. We are ramping up our ammunition production. Luckily, we have to. There's no way that we can normalize relations with Russia after the war is over.
So what does he think? And actually, this is a question for you. What do you think is the message that Russia hears when he says that kind of thing, and what will be their reaction?
Well, first of all, Secretary General Rutte needs to summon all the Dutch, Belgian, German, and French forces available, take stock of it, and begin this 10 to 20-year program that's designed to create the high-tech equivalent of a Maginot Line between Western Europe or Europe in general and Russia. See how that goes. I think he's delusional to the point of absurdity. The populations have recognized, all you have to do is look at the polling data, particularly in the two countries that I consider to be the most important, frankly, from this standpoint, are the Germans and the Poles. And those populations have made it abundantly clear they don't want a war with Russia. What this man is promising is a condition of permanent hostility on the European continent towards Russia. He's a lunatic. There's no chance of that happening. He's going to be gone here shortly in the next few years. New people are going to take over and say, what planet is this man on? This is not 1900. This is not 1945. This is not 1980. We live in a different world today. The world is much smaller. The consequences of military confrontation are far more serious. And you're dealing with a very different Russian state from anything we've ever seen. It is certainly not Soviet-like in any way, shape, or form. It is somewhat more czarist in many ways, but Russia itself is very focused on building prosperity, improving living standards, ending these conflicts, getting along with its neighbors. This is not a state that one has to prepare to fight in perpetuity. So it's just nonsensical. He'll be gone. All these people are going to be swept away. There's no future for this globalist nonsense of which he is very much a part.
And what about the Russian reaction to this? It seems to me that if you are talking about, like you just mentioned there and drew that whole picture about all these places that need to start this ramping up. You have Ursula von der Leyen already talking about this $800 billion European buildup, et cetera. I mean, it seems to me that that's going to cause Russia to say, well, we have to take your word, so we're going to continue to build up our forces afterwards, except they're starting from here and we're starting from somewhere under my table.
I think von der Leyen and the rest of these people are completely out of touch with financial and economic reality. Germany's being systematically deindustrialized and I would say almost fatally harmed by her own governments, thanks to their globalist colleagues. So I don't see that anything is going to happen in the near term remotely like what they're advocating right now. They're very much like Zelensky. They're going to be making these same ridiculous comments when they're removed from power. It's only a matter of time until these people are swept away. It's coming. Everybody says, well, how do you know that? Well, we have several hundred years of European history that teach us that lunatics like this eventually are removed. It takes time. It took 5 years to go from some semblance of order to complete chaos in France after 1789. But then eventually what happened? It ended. All of those people were removed and they moved down a different road. This is going to happen all over Europe. So I wouldn't worry terribly about Mark Rutte, who seems to think he is in command of some great military power that's ready to march at a moment's notice. And there's something else here. Remember, everybody should go back and read the speech that President Putin gave to the industrialists, the economists inside his own country. It was a very good speech because he talked about the future. And he made it very clear that Russia's future is with BRICS. He said Europe is gone for the moment. Maybe they'll come back, but at this point, we're moving on. We are focusing to the east and to the south. That's where our economic future lies. Does that sound like someone who's getting ready to invade Europe? Hell no. He's not remotely interested in it. But he's essentially saying these people are unbalanced in their thinking and behavior. So for the moment, it's pointless to discuss any sort of future economic or financial, let alone political arrangements with them. They're incapable. That's a very good speech. Everybody should read it. And that will explain where Russia is now headed. So frankly, Rutte is like King Lear raging at the storm. He's irrelevant.